This lecture is going to deal with the basics of costing, and this is lecture 2 in this regard. In the last lecture, we saw on the differences between financial and cost accounting and why there is a need for cost accounting, the objectives and functions of cost accounting, its advantages, and the definitions for cost. So, the next, we are going to the main topic and an important topic, classification of costs. So this is a detailed classification. We have a detailed classification. The first and the base classification is as direct and indirect. You can see this is the first and foremost, and this is the second important classification as material, labor, and overhead. So without knowing this, we cannot do any type of costing. Then this is also an important classification, fixed variable and semi-variable. The other things are of secondary importance compared to these first importance. These are of first importance, and this classification is of secondary importance. That is, only by knowing this you can understand costing. Without this knowledge, you cannot understand costing. So we have in detail by elements, it is as material. Elemental nature, it is classified, or by natural classification, you classify as material, labor, and expenditure. By degree of traceability or identifiability, you classified as direct or indirect. Then by variability, you classify as variable, semi-fixed, and semi-variable. Then the other classifications by function as production cost, administration cost, selling and distribution, and R&D cost. By association with the product, you classify as product cost or period cost. By controllability, you classify as controllable and uncontrollable. By normality, it is classified as normal and abnormal. By relevance, we classify as relevant and irrelevant. So I have just given the namings. I'm not going into details. So with this short remembering of the various terms, without having a good understanding of what it is, we will enter into the topic so that we will get to know the details so that you can understand these terms which are mentioned here in the classification. The first classification by nature or element. Under this classification, the cost that has incurred can be divided into three classes. First is material cost, second is labor cost, and expenses. A expenditure has happened or a cost has been incurred. For what? If it is for buying a material, then it is called as material cost. If you are paying a salary or a wages to an employee or a manager, then it is labor cost. If you are if you are paying for electricity, it is an expense. You cannot give the term as material or labor, because you are not giving to a person who has provided his service. Then it is a labor cost. When you pay to a person for providing his service, then it is a labor cost. When you get a material, like you get a button, you get a sewing thread, you get a fabric, you get yarn, you get a fiber, then it is a material cost, a material that you use for processing. So yarn selling price is not a cost in spinning mill. That is your product. You get to produce your product in a spinning mill. Your product is yarn, and you buy materials for producing yarn. You buy cotton, you buy polyester. Then the amount you have spent for buying polyester and cotton are material costs, and you are going to sell your product. You are not going to buy your product. So there it is not your raw material. Yarn is not a raw material in a spinning mill. Next, when you come to a weaving industry, then the raw material cost or material cost, I'm not saying raw material alone, because there may be other additional materials also. for producing a product like lubricating oil, some other materials you buy, which may not be directly found in the material at the end. I'm sorry, in the, by the material is not found in the product at the end, then it may be not a direct material, a raw material. So then it cannot be termed as a material cost. So other than this, now I hope that you have got a glimpse of what is material cost and what is labor cost. Then expenses. Expenses are something which you cannot classify as material and labor. Can you give some examples for expenses? I hope you are mapping when I say material and labor with all the textile related industries, and finding what are all the material costs and labor costs and expenses that are there in that occurring in that industry. Have you got some examples for expenses? Now we'll go into the next. So you have material cost, labor cost, expenses. So by elements or by nature, then the cost is classified as material, labor, and expenses. So the cost that is incurred for a physical substance or a thing. You buy a physical substance that you can see physically, you can touch it. So that, so should not take an asset that say that I cannot touch it. This is something physical I mentioned. I hope you understand. So material cost. Example, good example is raw material cost. Say the examples of raw material cost in our various textile supply chain. Yes, I hope you got. Fiber is fiber cost. Purchase of fiber is a raw material cost in spinning mill. Purchase of yarn is a raw material cost in a weaving or a knitting industry. Purchase of fabric for a processing industry or a garment industry is the raw material cost. So all these are examples of raw material costs. Next, labor cost. The cost that is incurred on human efforts. Physical substance is material. Human efforts is labor cost. So examples for labor costs are giving salary, wages. Salary is for employees who are permanent. Wages are for employees who are not permanent. Then bonus, incentives for their performance. Based on their performance appraisal, you give incentives for them. Then you give retirement benefits. Even you sometimes pay for people who for next 5 years after their retirement. It is not occurring nowadays. You give a settlement amount for, during their retirement. So those retirement benefits. So all these things are called as labor costs. Next is examples. You can say in the dyeing industry, dyeing master salary, a tenter. Who is a person? Tenter. Yes, he is a spinning mill direct labor. Okay, then manager salary is an indirect labor. Manager is common term. You can apply it for spinning, weaving, or knitting, or any other industry. Sewing operator wages are occurring in your garment industry. So these are examples for labor costs. So you pay for the cost incurred on human efforts is called as labor cost. Then the third classification, incurred for services, incurred for physical, incurred for human efforts, incurred for some service. Electricity is a service provided, telephone is a service provided, some cleaning activities that are rendered by agencies are services. If you have an employee in your industry itself who are doing those things, then it is not a service, you pay for that labor. If you pay totally, and someone like Maltab, who people who are coming for our college, you would have seen, they are not employees of our college. They are employees of some service provider. That service provider, you pay totally to the service provider, so then it is an expense. So you have to clearly understand, a sweeping employee, there is a person for sweeping, and he is under your role in your employee list, and you pay directly to that sweeping employee, then it is a labor cost. But if some person is coming for sweeping and he is not under your list, he is working under some other company who is providing that service for you, then it is an expense for your company. So you have to clearly understand the difference between an expense and labor cost. Then electricity and telephone services are all expenses. So you can one more thing you would have got doubt. I i want you to think on this. There is in a spinning mill there is a carding wire problem, and a person comes from LMW or Voltas and does some maintenance work and sets your machine for you. Then you pay for that. You pay for that. And then will it be termed under expense or labor? Can you tell the answer? If you have told your answer as expense, then it is right, because that person who has come for carding wire service is not a is not under your name employee list. You are paying to LMW or Voltas who are coming for providing that service. You're not paying to the person directly. So he is not under your role. You are paying for the company for that service. Then it is an expense. If you have found out it as expense, then you are right. So examples for expenses are, so expenses are things that are not covered under material and labor. Example, electricity expenses, rent, telephone, royalty. Say you for producing a material, you have the design is patented by somebody. You have to, when you use the design, you have to pay to that. You would have seen trademark, copyright, and things like that in your things, and you all are aware of what is a patent. If you are not aware, it is high time that you have to know about patents, because you are going to collect patents for your project work, browse, and it is a part of literature of your project work. So I want you to understand on patents. So those who own the patent, if you are using that technology, then you have to pay royalty for that expense. So now I hope you are clear with material, labor, and expenses are the type of classification based on nature or element or elemental classification. So with this, we go into the next important classification, which is direct or indirect. Direct or indirect is the second important classification. It is easy sometimes to, for the basic elemental classification is a little bit easier, whereas direct and indirect you have to be very clear, because if one industry it may be direct, for the other industry it may not be direct. So you have to be have a clear understanding of this classification, direct and indirect. So when the direct cost, when the costs are easily attributable, so easily attributed to a particular cost center or a product. So now you are not aware of the term cost center, but now you know what is product. Say yarn. You consider a product yarn in a spinning mill. So this product has some material which is directly there. What is the material? So if in a cotton yarn, what is the direct material that is there in that product? It is fiber. The material that is there in that product is fiber. So for 1 kg of yarn, you require how many kgs? Is it 97 kgs? For 100 kg of yarn, is it 97 kgs or 110 or 120 kgs of raw material you have to put in? Yes, I hope you are right. You have to put more amount because something goes as waste. So you always put a higher kg of fiber and you get some lower kg of yarn as product. So product is yarn. The material is fiber, and it is directly easy attributed. You can easily find out that material in that product. Then it is a direct material. You can have a relationship. So for 110 kg of cotton raw material that I put in, a cotton I put in, I get 100 kgs of yarn and 110 kg of cotton I put in, 100 kg of yarn I get. So directly attributed to that particular product. So, so it is an egg. So cotton in a spinning mill. Similarly, fabric labels are all directly found in your product. For one garment, you need one label. For one garment, you need 1.2 meters of fabric, something like that. You can directly attribute. Whereas uh, when this is related to raw material. Now let us come to wages. So when it is direct, when you pay per piece, so for stitching one piece, you provide a cost. So you can directly relate it with the output that is coming out. So for this product, the advertisement cost is, you have three products, and for one product, the advertisement cost is this much. So it is directly attributed to that product. Then it is called as direct material. You will get a better understanding when I explain in the indirect cost. So what is indirect cost? When you cannot be directly assigned to a particular cost center or a product, then it is called as indirect cost, and the other term is overheads. You have overheads as the other term used for indirect cost. I think these terms you would have already heard, but the understanding of these terms is what I am trying to give. So it cost must be allocated in order to, you cannot directly allocate to some product. Say some lubricating oil is used in a ring frame. It is a material cost, but that material is not found in the product, and you don't know for how much kgs of material you have to put how much oil. If you cannot directly attribute that like that, then it is indirect cost. So then for a manager's salary cannot be attributed directly to a particular count of yarn that is produced or a particular hour. You cannot do that. You pay a total amount, and there will be differences in production. You cannot directly attribute it, but you pay wages based on a particular base, for number of hours or number of pieces. Based on that, you pay for the as wages. Then it is a direct cost. Whereas indirect cost, you don't know for how many hours. You have a particular shift time, but what is that per hour, or what is that per kg of product is not directly attributed a manager's salary. So then it is an indirect cost or an overhead. So these are all indirect costs. You have many indirect costs. So maintenance and support, for which they are doing maintenance, they do regular maintenance in spinning, speed frame, comber, all they do regular maintenance. They do monthly maintenance, all those things. You don't know what is that per kg. You can't attribute it. So it is an indirect cost. Then wages pay to security. Security staff are going to work whether you produce 100 kgs or 200 kgs. No direct relationship on whether you produce or not. Also, security are going to be there, and you have to pay. So you cannot directly attribute it to that product. Then it is an indirect cost. Storage cost. So you are say you have air conditioning and things like that. You take your material and condition it there. You cannot do any particular relating for your air conditioning and ventilation purposes. Many the amount is spent, but you cannot attribute it to a particular product. For the department, you have to maintain RH. Then that cost, the expenses for that is an indirect cost. Managing director salary, he is not managing for 100 kgs. This much is his cost. If he is managing for 200 kgs of production, his salary is not going to differ. Then it is an indirect cost. Similar maintenance cost, rent, whether you produce or not, you have to pay rent. So it is an indirect cost. A total company advertisement, irrespective of whatever product you are producing, then it is an indirect cost. Most of the advertisements are indirect cost. Few advertisements, if you will have 2-3 advertisements based on for 3 products produced in the same company, then it will become a direct cost. Mostly it is an indirect cost, as you see the advertisements. So the base classification is direct and indirect cost. In direct cost, you have direct labor direct materials and direct expenses, and in indirect cost you have indirect labor, indirect material, and indirect expenses. So this total, this is the base classification, an important classification, and this classification is to be done for any type of calculation. Without this base, you cannot do any calculations further, or any other classification is also dependent on this, especially production cost. Those things are all dependent on this, and this is the main aspect in your cost sheet. So this understanding of this is very necessary. So this is called as elements of cost. By elements, labor, material and expenses, and as direct and indirect. Hope you are now. So this indirect, this is another thing given. Based on elements of cost, you are dividing into three: material, labor, and expenses. So it is called as expenses or other expenses. Both are the same. In material, you have direct, indirect material, labor, direct, indirect labor, and other expenses, direct and indirect. So all are elements of cost. In this, these indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses are alone termed as overheads. So this is to, when the question is asked as give the elements of cost, you have to put this table and explain. So this is the basic and important classification elements or by nature of cost. So now there is a small problem. Can you identify whether it is indirect or direct, and also on elements? Have you identified? I hope I want you to identify and find the answers for the previous slide by tomorrow, by the next lecture. Hope you have already done it in a minute. So the third important classification is based on variability: fixed, variable, and semi-variable. This is another, this type of classification is of third importance. You need to understand on all classifications, the basic or the elemental classification is a must. But based on variability, when you classify, you can use it for few purposes like budgeting, which is break even, all those things, this type of classification. I told you in the earlier lecture on cost control and not cost reduction. In cost control, you will have actually fix a target. After fixing a target, you will see where you will have a budget, and you will fix a target of the cost that should be incurred. Then you actually produce the product. After actual production, you find whether there is some variances between your target and your actuals. So you have to analyze those variances and control the costs where it is happening. For this type, the classification is fixed and variable is important. Then to find whether your what is your break even point, break even sales, where it is profit, no loss sale, how many units you have to sell, whether for to find you have attained the break even. To attain a break even, what is the number of units, what is the total volume that you have to sell. So for that understanding, you have to understand this classification better. It is very simple: fixed and variable. So it does not, fixed mean you do not, that does not change irrespective of the number of units produced. So it is fixed. When the number of units change, then it is variable. When it is partially variable, then it is called as a semi-variable cost. We'll go into the details. So this is your fixed cost. This, when your cost increases proportionately, then it is variable cost. When it does not change, that is fixed cost. So your total cost will be like this. Your total cost is your fixed cost plus your variable cost. So your total cost is like this. So this is the graph on variability. classification. So units of production and cost. So when the cost does not change, it is fixed cost. When it changes proportionately, it is variable cost. So the total cost will be fixed cost plus variable cost, that is shown here, total cost. So we'll go to the next slide. So variable costs are those costs that vary directly and proportionately. Directly. See, we have the term directly and proportionately it should increase. If it is increase, it is 2 times, it should go. The graph may be like this or this or this. There should be some proportion. Okay, so this proportion should be there. It need not be the center itself. It can be any of these things. All are right. So a constant ratio between the change in the cost and the change in the output. So this is your output and this is your cost. Your y-axis is your cost and your x-axis is the output. So for this change, there should be a proportionate change, a constant ratio throughout. Then it is called as variable cost. So examples of variable cost are petrol cost for a vehicle. Then direct labor cost, when you pay based on the number of pieces. Say if you are stitching 100 pieces, you pay according to that. When you are packing 100 bags of cones, you pay per bag, then it is a variable cost. Whereas it does that, and you will not pay if you are not going to produce, then it is a variable cost. If it is you are not having them as your counterpart, you will not pay them. So that it is a variable cost. So one more graph for fixed cost. So fixed cost does not change. Fixed cost does not change for the given period, whether whatever the output is. Output volume changes, whereas your cost does not change. The best examples are rent for the property, taxes, all those things you have to pay. So these are all fixed costs. So do you have some doubt whether some few examples are fixed or variable costs? You should have, I think. So we'll see the difference here, and then we'll go into the next, the same under this variability. One more thing is there, which is semi-variable cost. Before that, we look into the differences. Hope you understand this. In total, when it is a variable cost, changes in the level of activity changes as the level of activity increases. According to the output, it changes, but its per unit cost remains the same. If it is 10 rupees per unit, it remains the same throughout. The ratio remains the same. Whereas in fixed cost, it remains the same. But when you produce more, then your cost reduces. If you are paying a rent of 10,000 rupees and you are producing 1,000 products, then by dividing it, you get per unit it is 10 rupees. But you are paying the same, it remains constant. It remains constant even if you produce in total 20,000 products. I'm sorry, 1,000 products. 2,000 products if you produce, you are going to pay the same rent of 10,000. 10,000 divided by 20, then it is only 5. It is less. So reduces as the activity level increases. If you produce more, your fixed cost per unit reduces. This is the meaning here. So this variable, fixed, and this type is your semi-variable. Semi-variable may be like this or this, anything. All are semi-variable costs. So anything, so any shape may be there for semi-variable cost. So this green thing is semi-variable, blue is variable, red is fixed. So by seeing the graph, you should be able to identify which cost it is. But you have to draw this graph, only then you can find out whether it is a variable cost, or from the definitions also you can find out whether it is variable, semi-variable or fixed cost. Hope you are aware of semi-variable cost now. So this contains both fixed and variable components and they are partly affected. They are not fully affected, then it is variable. Partly affected, not affected, then it is fixed. Not affected, fixed. totally affected, variable, partly affected, then it is semi-variable costs. So examples are telephone bills. Till this much units you will have one rupee. Then after this much units you maybe 0.8 rupees, 0.75. Now, these things earlier telephone bills were like this. Even electricity and some maintenance costs are under semi-variable. Many costs you can see it is semi-variable costs. So one more type is there, semi-fixed cost, and we are not going into that type of classification, which is not of use now. So we are going to deal. So you can see the various graphs for fixed costs. Say wherever it is the line is same. It may be anywhere, but it should, based on the activity, it should not change. Next, you have variable costs. See, it is here, anywhere like this, anything. There is some constant ratios there. Next, you have semi-variable. See, it is not zero. At the start, it is not zero because there is some fixed component. This is the fixed component. See, it is not zero at the start. It is not zero at the start. Even if you do not produce, there is some cost involved. See, so that this has variability. If it is the straight line, if it does not start at zero, then it is fixed. And if it is not having proportion, it is not proportionate also. It may be proportionate after some component, but these are semi-variable costs. So I hope you are clear with from the patterns. I think you will be able to identify whether it is variable, semi-variable, or fixed cost. So I want you to do this problem now. I want you to take your note and calculator. So a company has prepared a budget, and in that for 1,000 units, these are the various costs, and for 2,000 units, these are the various costs. You have 5 headings: direct material, direct labor, rent of the factory, power, and maintenance. So I want you to identify first what are these type of costs. How will you find out this? First and foremost, very easy thing, does not change whether it is 100, whether it is 1,000 or 2,000 units. Some cost does not change. It is fixed cost. So this is fixed cost. Next, is that how to see whether it is proportionate from this? Maybe it is a simple problem. You can see proportionality here is actually doubled. But whereas on all these things, you cannot see the proportionate thing. But you have to calculate and find. We will see this classification in our next class. So I want you to write this and come so that you can understand this classification better. So you have to work. I want you to try out this as well as the classification in the earlier thing, whether it is direct labor, direct material, or indirect material. That classification and this has to be completed before the next lecture. Thank you for now.